So now I'd like to take some secondary dominants and secondary leading tone chords in context and identify them. Later we'll also write some secondary dominants and secondary leading tone chords. So let's start with this song. It's Ich liebe dich, or I love you, by Beethoven. And I want to take that principle, these two principles here, these rules of thumb regarding accidentals, and put them to use. So the first thing I want to do is just look for accidentals. With that one exception we talked about. And I'll think about that. There may be another one too that can fit in the chord and doesn't require any accidentals, but most of them do. So we're looking for accidentals first, and then if it's raised, we'll think of it as a leading tone and see if that's true. If we see a lowered note, we'll see if it forms the chordal seventh in a secondary dominant or secondary leading tone chord. Okay, so scanning, I don't see any up here. Here's one. And it's also an accompaniment, but it's still D sharp, either spot. And here's another one there. That's just redoing the C, making sure that the performer gets C sharp turned back into C natural. In other words, it's a cautionary accidental. So let's take a look at these two accidentals. Those are the only two that we're really concerned with. They're the only two notes that go outside the key. It's a kind of chromaticism then. And let's take a look at each one. Now, we're in G major, and it really establishes that key in the first four measures. You've got a 1 in G. You move to 5 here. It's in 4-3 position because you've got scale degree 2. Scale degree 7, but the same chord. So 6-5, and then you're back to tonic. So we've got our tonic firmly established. Then we change, we invert here. G, B, and D are part of that chord. And now we get this D sharp coming in. That doesn't really change the chord. I think it would be best to think of it as embellishing. So what kind of embellishment does it provide? Right, that's a passing tone. Hopefully you answered passing tone there. So that's a chromatic passing tone that leads you from D up to E. And that's significant because that is the highest note in the whole melody there. Ich liebe dich so wie du mich am Abend und am Morgen, noch war kein Tag, wo du und ich. So that's the high point. That's the place that you need a little extra push. And the chromaticism provides it. And it puts the emphasis on you, the other person, which makes sense. I love you. Du und ich nicht teilten unsere Sorgen. So it comes all down after that. The rest of this phrase comes down from that high point. That's significant. It's a chromatic note that's serving like a leading tone. It's leading up to the climactic moment. But you don't have to think of it as part of a chord at all. Now, if we were to put it in a chord, we'd have G, B, D becoming D sharp. So G, B, D sharp makes an augmented, G augmented. And we could show that, but that really is a matter of a melodic motion and isn't really like a fresh chord that happens there. So I would prefer to put P there instead of making a big to-do out of the fact that you've got the change in quality from major to augmented on that second half of the second beat. Alright, now let's look at this one. C sharp. Now here you've got A, C sharp, E, G. In other words, A7, dominant seventh. That's the pop symbol I'll put up top there. A7, but it's over that C sharp. Now notice how you use slash notation. In pop symbols, you use it to show what's the bass. What's in the bass here? G sharp. We use it in a very different way when we're talking about secondary dominants. We use it to say of something. So this is going to be 5 in first inversion of something. And since it's first inversion, I need to write 5, 6, 5 there. And then one way to do this is to write the slash notation. There's another way, and I'll get to that in a minute. This note C sharp is a part of a chord, and it's the chordal third. That's exactly what we would expect, because we suspect a raised note of being the leading tone. Look how it resolves. It moves up. Yes, that one did too, but it wasn't part of a chord. This one is, and it does exactly what we would think it should do, which is be the leading tone, be the chordal third and a dominant seventh. Now, that is not the dominant chord in this key. If you're in G, D7 is the dominant seventh. But this is A7, so we're having to move outside the key and think in terms of D here. We're tonicizing D by giving it its dominant. Now that's 5, 6, 5 of 5. And it's very handy to have that accidental. It points your eye right to the note that has to be pushed up in order to create a leading tone to, in this case, D. So use those accidentals to help you find the places where the secondary dominant or secondary leading tone comes in, and then determine which is it. Is this 7 diminished 7 of D, or is it 5, 6, 5 of D? Those are your choices. Okay, so let me get a little bit of context. You can see what's going on here. We've got a 4 chord here, C, E, G. And you'd expect that it's a predominant, and that's going to be true. The predominant is intensified. In other words, you've got a chord here, the dominant of the dominant, that really's got to pull. That the whole crux of the matter is here with C changing to C sharp, and now you really want the dominant. So don't give this a dominant function. It's a secondary dominant. That you can show that in some cases. If you need to use a symbol to show it as a secondary dominant, put brackets around it to show that it's not this. That means something very different. Here, though, we don't need to resort to this. This is really the last choice. If no other option works, I'll use this. What I want to show is what it's doing in the big picture. In other words, in the context of a phrase in G major, this is part of the predominant area. It makes me want the dominant, but I'm not there yet. So don't write this. And in this case, we don't even want to write that, because we can show what this chord, how it's functioning in the context of G. It's a predominant. It's getting us to this the D that's about to appear. Now you'll notice that the chordal seventh hangs on. This is important because the resolution there happens there, delayed. Yes, the bass note arrives, but not all the upper notes arrive until right here. Now, here's what we usually, most people I think that have been trained in American schools at this time seem to have learned it as a 1-6-4. And it looks like everything's gone haywire because you've got a dominant of 5 that doesn't arrive. I mean, you've got a 5 that just doesn't appear. It doesn't materialize. Now, it does happen over here. There's your D, F sharp. You've even got an A and a C. D, F sharp, A, C is D7, and then those are the notes you're expecting here. I like the symbol, and maybe some of you learned it this way, that shows that the dominant is just being embellished by 4-3 suspension and a 6-5 suspension. Notice how that's true. I want to show that it's not as if all the rules that you've learned have just gone out the window, and somehow this 5 of 5 is going to whoops 1 and not to 5 at all. It's not a mistake. It's not the rules all being set aside. It's the suspension principle happening here. Let me see where the other. Oh, this is the suspended note, the chordal seventh, which we know needs to get to F sharp. That happens. It's just delayed by suspending the G. The G above the bass is a 4th, and there's our 4, and I'm going to show it as 4-3 suspension because that's what it does. It moves down to the 3rd. So no, the rules still apply. The strong pull on the chordal seventh in our ear is satisfied. the sixth, which I'm showing as 6-5, is the B, but here we need to alter this just a little bit for this circumstance. The 6 actually moves up to a 7th. So this is the usual way to show it, but in this case I need to scratch that and show that the 6th above the bass goes to a 7th. The 6th is rather free because it is a consonant with the bass. So that 6th, B here serves as a passing kind of motion up, but most of the time we end up writing 6-4-5-3 because that 6 usually heads down. It doesn't have to, but it usually does. So here we're focusing on this motion, A, B, up to C. And that's really doubling the voice part up there. It also moves A, B, up to C. Okay, so you're going to see this kind of scenario happening over and over where you've got the 5-6-5 of 5, or say 5-7 of 5, or maybe even 7 diminished 7 of 5. These chords apply to the dominant, not getting there right away because some note is suspended, and create a cadential 6-4. The cadential 6-4 intervenes, but eventually all the notes of the 5, in this case 5-6-5 of 5, get where they need to go and get you to the dominant. Okay, so I wanted to use this example because this is going to be one of those trickier things where you say, now wait a minute, that's 5 of 5, but it's not going to 5. What's the deal? Well, I hope that makes sense of it. Now let's go to one where we're going to see a whole bunch of secondary dominants and use the principles we just talked about, the accidental rules of thumb, to quickly locate them and identify them. This is Beethoven.